Hey, welcome back to the channel. So about 4 years ago, I made a video about VS Code, and at the time I was brand new to the text editor, and I was sort of just sharing my first impressions. Well, 4 years later, I'm still using VS Code, and so now I want to share a lot of the tips and tricks and, keyboard shortcuts and time savers that I've learned along the way. And nothing I show in the video will require any extensions, so these are all just built-in default features of VS Code. The first 5 minutes or so is just me optimizing the keyboard shortcuts for switching between your open tabs or files. If you're not interested in that, use the timestamps to switch to new topics. Finally, before we jump into the action, this video is sponsored by me. In the description, you'll find a link that has heavily discounted coupons for each and every one of my premium web development courses. My newest course is about MySQL databases, but I also have courses about JavaScript, Node, Express, React, WordPress, CSS, so on and so forth. Having said all of that, let's jump into some VS Code action. Okay, let's start with different shortcuts for opening different files or switching through your different open tabs. So for example, I have these 3 different files, these 3 different tabs open. Instead of clicking on them, you can use, on Windows, it's the Alt key and then the number of the tab. On Mac, it's Control and then the number. So if I want to go to the second tab, that's number 2, so it's Control 2. On Windows, that's Alt 2, but Control 3, Control 1, you get the idea. What if you didn't already have all of your files opened and you wanted to jump into a file based on its name? Well, you can just press Command P, or on Windows, Control P, just search for the name. So if I start to search for main.css, press Enter, cool. Let me get all 3 files opened up again, because I want to draw a comparison to your web browser. So in a web browser, if you want to jump between really quick all of your tabs, you can press Control Tab. Well, you can do that in VS Code. You can see I'm holding down the Control key, and then if you press Tab, you can switch between them. However, VS Code has a really weird default way of ordering the tab options here. So it doesn't use the order that you have them open in currently. Instead, it orders them by the most recent tab that you visited. So for example, I'm in this HTML file, and then I jump into scripts, and I go back into index. But notice my second tab open is my CSS file. But if I press Control Tab, it doesn't list them in that order. It's based on recency, and maybe it's just me, but that's super unintuitive. It confuses me every time I try to use this feature. So really quick, I want to show you how to change this default ordering so that it actually uses the order that you have them in. So to change that keyboard shortcut, let's open up our command palette. So Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P on Windows, and then start to type in shortcuts.json. And we don't want the one that says default. We want the one that just says open keyboard shortcuts JSON. If you've never changed any of these key bindings before, this file will be empty except for just an array, so opening and closing square brackets. But the code that I want to draw your attention to is this area, so I'll uncomment that. You won't already have this code here to uncomment, but just a keyboard shortcut tip. In VS Code, doesn't matter which language you're currently working with, you can press Command/ or Control/ to comment out the current line, or you can highlight a bunch of lines, and again, Control/ Command/ to toggle commenting or uncommenting that entire selection. So inside your empty array, you would just type in this selected code on the screen right now. You could pause this, or maybe I'll include a link to this in the description. Essentially, we're just customizing the Control tab and Control-Shift tab, just like you would in a web browser, so that you can cycle through your tabs in the expected order. Right? The order that you actually have them open in up here, not whichever one you've jumped to the most recently. So if we save those changes, I can close that. Now when I press Control-Tab, awesome. It doesn't even bring up that weird little menu. It just cycles through them in the exact order that you would expect. I like this. Before we change topics, while we're still on this topic of switching between your different tabs, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, well, how come in a web browser, if I want to jump to my third tab, I can just press Control 3 on Windows or Command 3 on Mac, but in VS Code, we have to use these other weird keys. So on Windows, it's Alt 3. On a Mac, it's Control 3. Why can't we use the same modifier key as you would in a web browser on your operating system? Well, it's because by default, VS Code uses those keyboard shortcuts for switching between your different split windows. So for example, I'm on a Mac, so I would press Command 1 or Command 2, Command 3, Command 4. You would press Control on a PC. right? But the idea is you're creating these different splits. But to jump to this third split, it would be Command 3 or Control 3. And then to jump back to the first one, it's Command 1 or Control 1. I don't know about you, but personally, I never ever used this split editor feature. Now, I'm sure a lot of people love the ability, if you have a really large monitor, to be able to split different files like this. You can obviously keep this feature where you split your files, but if you don't actively use those keyboard shortcuts of, Command 2 or Control 2, what I want to show you right now is how to be able to use those prime real estate keyboard shortcuts for actually switching between your tabs, just like you would in a web browser, right? So if I want to go to main.css, and I'm on a Mac, instead of Control 2, I want to be able to press Command 2, right? That's what you do in Google Chrome. Why can't I do that in VS Code? So to set that up, just open up your command palette, Control Shift or Command Shift P, and then just visit the same one that we already visited, open keyboard shortcuts JSON. And then you can see I've already manually typed these out. So let me just uncomment these. But essentially, I'm just manually spelling out because I'm on a Mac, so it's Command. If you were on Windows, you could make this Control plus the number. But it's just going to switch to that open editor or tab instead of having anything to do with the split screen feature. So if I save that, cool. Now I can use the exact, Google Chrome shortcuts for switching between my tabs. That's enough talking about tabs and files, but let's keep talking about keyboard shortcuts. So if you need a bit more screen real estate, you can hide your sidebar by pressing Control or Command B, as in the bar of sidebar, B. Cool. Also, if you wanted the sidebar to be on the right-hand side of the screen, you can just go into your settings. So that's Control, comma, or Command, comma. And then let's just open up the JSON file. So click this icon right about here. And if you just start typing in a new property, the auto suggestion is great. So if you just start typing in sidebar, you can see the first suggestion, workbench sidebar location. You can just use that. And then it even lets you know the values are left or right. So if I set that to right and save this settings JSON file, cool. Personally, I like it on the left, so I'll remove that, but I just wanted to let you know that that is an option. Okay, so Command B, Control B toggles your sidebar. If you want to toggle your terminal or command line, it's Control or Command J. The keyboard shortcut that VS Code suggests, if you look in the View menu, is Control tilde. But personally, that's sort of awkward for me to move my hands to hit, so I really like the Control or Command J. Also, if you want to bump up the font size of your command line in your settings file, if you just start typing font size, there should be an option, terminal integrated font size, so you can just bump that up a bit if you want. Oops, I need a comma here. Cool. All right, now let's really change gears. So did you know that VS Code has a built-in Markdown live preview feature? Until just about a month or two ago, I had no idea this existed. So check this out. We don't need any extensions whatsoever. So if I just create a new Markdown file, there are about 30 different ways to create a new file in VS Code. One way that I like, where you don't have to take your hands off the keyboard or open up any sort of OS level save dialog. If you just open up your command palette and type in new file, we can use that command. You can see now my cursor is blinking on the left-hand Explorer sidebar. So I'll just create example.md for a Markdown file. And now in this file, check this out. If we add a heading level 1, hello there, and then maybe a paragraph of text, and then a heading level 2, hey, hi, another paragraph. Now, if I want to preview what this looks like in Markdown, right, with my headings and my paragraphs, well, this preview icon, this is not usually here if you're working with, an HTML, CSS, or JavaScript file, but with a Markdown file, this icon will appear. You can click it. Cool, and there you see that's our heading level 1. Here's our heading level 2. Now, here's the really cool part. If you scroll on one of them, it scrolls both, so they're perfectly in sync. As far as I know, this has full Markdown support, so if I want to add a bulleted list here, cool, yep, there's the bulleted list. So yeah, until about a month ago, I had no idea this existed. It's a really cool feature. Okay, now a totally unrelated topic, but another feature that I had no idea existed until about a month ago. Check this out. So maybe you already know that VS Code has multi-cursor editing support. And maybe you already know that VS Code has regular expression support, but did you know that you can combine the power of these two things? For example, I can click here to place my cursor and then hold down the Alt or Option key and then click somewhere else. I can click here. Notice I have 3 cursors now all blinking. So I can press Enter. That happens for all 3 cursors. I could add on a property. Cool. And then just press the Escape key when you're ready to go back to single cursor mode. So you might have already been aware of that multi-cursor feature, and you might also be aware that VS Code has regular expression support when searching. Let me show you an example. So in this file, imagine I wanted to write a regular expression that matched the word function and then a space and then however many characters and then an opening parentheses like that. So you would press Control or Command F to bring up your find option here. Do make sure that you enable this icon right here. That's how you enable regular expressions. So now imagine if I searched for function, space, a dot for a wildcard, plus symbol to match multiple, and then the opening parentheses. You can't just type opening parentheses. You would want to escape it. So backslash and then opening parentheses. Cool. So that regular expression matches all of these. That's exactly what we wanted. But now to combine this with the power of multi-cursor editing, you can press Alt or Option on Mac, Alt and Enter. And now I have cursors for all of those regular expression matches. So I can press the right arrow once and you can see, then I can press it back, left again. Now if I wanted to add a word at the end, I could just type it once, right? So I added a word at the end of all of those names. You can use your arrow keys, but if you wanted to get to the very beginning of the line for all of the lines, you can see, for example, on this line, my cursor is at the start of the word, but then down here, it's still 3 letters away from the beginning of the word. On Mac, you could press Command and the left arrow. On Windows, you could just press the Home key on your keyboard to get to the far edge, and then you could use the right arrow key to go in a bit. So now I could add, a word to the beginning of the function names. You get the idea. Anyways, though, point is you can combine the power of regular expressions and multi-cursor editing. Before we change topics, I want to mention a feature that I use all the time, and this has nothing to do with regular expressions. It's just a multi-cursor tip. So let me close this out. But the tip is that if you select a certain phrase that you're interested in, so if I select the word function, you can just press Control D or Command D to select the next instance of that, and that's creating multi-cursors for each one. So if I press it one more time, you can see now all 4 functions, and you can replace them all at once. I didn't actually want to do that, so let me Command or Control Z. Let's move on. Let's change gears and talk about tab triggers. So back in my HTML file, it's completely empty, but you can just type doc, D-O-C, and then hit tab. So depending on the language you're working with, VS Code has all sorts of built-in snippets like that. Now, even beyond those snippets, VS Code also has something called Emmet installed and enabled by default. Emmet is specifically for HTML and CSS. So, for example, if I wanted an unordered list, you just type UL, hit tab. Inside there, if I want a list item, you just hit LI, hit tab. But better yet, we can do this all at once. So let me get a clean slate again. What if I wanted an unordered list with 5 list items and I wanted each one to have a link inside it? You could just type UL, greater than symbol to go inside that. We want a list item, but we want 5 of them. So list item, multiply or asterisk by 5. And then inside of each one of those, we want an A element. You hit tab. Not only does it set that up for you, but now we can tab trigger through the different input locations. So, you set up the actual URL, hit tab, first link, hit tab again, you enter the address, second link. So you can just tab through all of those super quickly. There's a lot more to Emmet than that, but I won't bore you by going too in depth right now. If you're interested in that, be sure to look up a separate Emmet tutorial. Having said that though, a lot of people know about Emmet in HTML, but not everyone seems to know that Emmet exists in CSS as well. For example, in this declaration, if I just say M10 and then hit tab, it knows that I meant margin 10. Or, if you want to remove the underline on a link, you would say text decoration none. If you just type TDN and hit tab, it knows what you mean. Or, text align center, just TAC, hit tab. Cool. So it's surprisingly good at guessing what you mean. Big picture, whether it's Emmet like this or just tab triggers in general, I'm a huge fan of the tab completion behavior. So anytime there's something that I do frequently, if VS Code doesn't already have a built-in default tab trigger for it, I'll go manually create my own new custom one. To give you a real-world example, let's talk about React.js. So let's imagine I was going to create a new component. So over here, new file, or better yet, let's use the command palette. Command-Shift-P, new file. Let's name it just test component.js. Okay, so every time you create a new component file in React, there's a lot of boilerplate, right? You create a function, you export that function, you return a bit of JSX. Up at the top, you need to import React. So I actually have a tab trigger. I don't currently have it installed because I want to install it or set it up with you, but I created my own custom tab trigger snippet where if you just type RC for React component, I can just hit tab on that and it will fill in everything for me. But for this video, I've sort of wiped my VS Code clean, so let me show you how I would set that up. Well, first of all, and this doesn't have anything to do with tab snippets, but it's just a React.js note. So VS Code has built-in support for JSX and React. But because this file ends in .js instead of .jsx, VS Code doesn't know to treat it as a React file. So you can see in the bottom right corner, the language is just set to JavaScript instead of JavaScript React. So you could manually click on that in the bottom right corner and start to type in JavaScript React and click on that. Cool, so this is what we want, but you don't want to have to do that manually each time you open up a JS file. So to fix this, I could rename my file to be .jsx, but there are valid reasons to want to have your React component just end in .js. So let me show you what I do. It might seem a little bit hacky, but I've actually found 0 downsides. So if you just go into your settings, so controller command comma, go into your JSON file, and let me add a new line, so comma. Start to type in files.association, so it's this first one, files associations, curly brackets. In that object, let's just set up a new line, quotes, asterisk .js, colon, give it a value of quotes, JavaScript React. So I'm just setting any and all JavaScript files to use JavaScript React. Now, I have not found a single downside to this. For example, when working with non-React JavaScript projects like server-side Express.js files, I don't notice any downsides. So again, it seems hacky, but I've had really good luck with this. The point is though, is now if I reopen up my test component, awesome. VS Code knows to treat it as a JavaScript React file. Okay, now the main reason I wanted to make sure that I was using the language or syntax that I really want like that is because when you create your own tab trigger snippets, you'll usually create them for a specific language. So for example, let's create a React snippet. So you would open up your command palette, Control or Command-Shift-P, and then start to type in snippets, and you should see this option called Preferences, Configure User Snippets. Let's go ahead and press Enter on that. And now it's going to ask you which language. So because the current file I had open was React, it knows that that's probably what I want, but you can scroll through the giant list of every different programming language. But we obviously want JavaScript React. Cool, so that's going to open up this new file. It's just an object, and then everything inside here is commented out. So this is where you include your own custom snippets. Now, creating your own snippets like this can be sort of awkward, unintuitive, time-consuming, because you have to spell out each line of code inside an array, and each line needs to be in quotes. So typing this out is really unintuitive. So what I like to do, I create all my snippets using this website, this web app called snippet-generator.app. You can see by default it's set to VS Code, so you just make up a name, then you pick what tab you would want. So like if I want to just be able to type RC tab, that's what goes there. And then your actual code, and it can be multi-lines, goes here. And then down here it even says if you want to add a placeholder, it shows you the keyboard shortcut. So for example, if I want to place one here, and then if I wanted to place another one here, I would change that to 2. So now if you were going to copy that into your VS Code file, you could just type RC tab, and then you could tab through these different locations. Now, I'm not going to walk through in detail, creating my React component snippet, but I will share a link to this. It's my GitHub or Gist link, and this has, if you click raw right here, several of the React.js snippets that I've set up. So you can just copy this entire thing into your clipboard. This link will be in the description back in VS Code. You can get rid of everything in this file, including the overall curly brackets, and just paste in your clipboard. Give that a save. Cool. So now back in my test component file, if I just hit RC for React component, hit tab, awesome. Now, even better yet, I can name this component. So if I wanted it to be called featured banner, notice I typed that in once, and it also named it down here on the export line. Also, if I hit tab on my keyboard, it automatically takes me to the next logical spot, right? Where you can start typing in JSX. And because we're in the right syntax, you can use Emmet tab triggers just like it was real HTML. So I could say, give me a heading level 3, hello. Give me an unordered list with list items. Give me 5 of them. Give me a link inside there, hit tab. You get the idea. That's enough about React and tab trigger snippets. Let's change topics. So let's talk about how to navigate through a file efficiently. So if I go back into this regular JavaScript file, and imagine you have a really long file with all sorts of different function names and variables, and you want sort of a bird's eye view to quickly see what the functions and variables are. Well, you can just press Control or Command Shift O, and that's going to give you this menu that's going to show you, just at a bird's eye view, the different variables and functions, and you can jump right to one. So if I want to go to this one, just press Enter, takes you right there. And you can do this for just about any language. So I can try it in CSS as well. Command Shift O. Cool. And it works in HTML as well. The cool thing about HTML is it even supports CSS-like selectors. So let's see. If I have 2 different elements that have the same class, and then I press Command Shift O, and if I start to search for div.banner, right, a div with a class of banner, it is smart enough to understand this CSS-like selector. Press Enter, it takes you right to that piece of code. Cool, so that's enough for the Command-Shift-O tip. Let's move on to something different, and that is, and I didn't even realize this until fairly recently, if you wanted to cut a line or copy a line into your clipboard, you actually don't need to select or highlight the entire line. So just if your cursor is anywhere on that line, you can just press Control or Command X to cut it, and then you can paste it in wherever you want. And that works for both cut and copy, right? So if my cursor is anywhere on this line, I want to copy it, just Control or Command C, you can paste it anywhere. If you want to duplicate a line, you can have your cursor anywhere on the line, and really instead of copying and pasting, you can also just press Alt or Option. So Alt, Shift, and then if I press down, it duplicates it and my cursor jumps to the line below. Let me undo that. If you press Alt Shift up, it duplicates it, but it keeps your cursor on the top copy. So if you need to duplicate a line, that's a good bit faster than copying and pasting. If you want to move a line up or down, so let's use this title line as a quick example. You just place your cursor anywhere on that line. You don't need to select anything, and you can just press Alt and up or down. So Alt up moves it up. Cool. This does work with multiple lines as well. So if I select, these 2 lines, now I can use Alt up or down to move them wherever I want. If you want a quick way to select multiple lines like that, and you don't want to have to use, the down arrow while holding the Shift key and then, press either the End key or Command right to get to the end of the line. So if you want a quick way to select multiple lines, just press Control or Command L. So you press it once, it selects the current line. You can press it again and again. And now you can do whatever you want with those 3 lines. You could use the Alt up or down to move them, copy and paste, whatever. Okay, at this point I just have 2 more tips for you. So the first has to do with indenting or formatting. Let me show you what I mean. So let me empty out my body area. And imagine you want to copy and paste a bit of HTML or any programming language from some other source, but the indentation is all messed up like you can see in this example. So if I copy that, paste it right here, clearly this indentation is not perfect. Now if you open up your command palette, so Command Shift P, yes, you could just type in format, and then, you can either format the selected area or just format the entire document. So let me try that. Well, I don't really agree with these empty spaces here and here, but that did fix the indentation for that HTML. So you can do that, but you probably don't want to have to run that command. What's nice is if you just tell VS Code to automatically format your document anytime you save or anytime you paste in a bit of code. This is definitely personal preference, but if you like this sort of thing, this is a really cool feature. So to do this, we just press Command or Control comma, go into your settings JSON, and just set up a new line and start to type in or search for format on, and you can see there's format on save, format on paste. Let's just turn both of them on. So just set them to true. So format on save, let's do format on paste, set that to true. Give that a save. So now back in my index.html file, let me start all over again, right? So if I wanted to paste in this code that has broken indentation, you just copy it, paste it right here. I didn't have to run a command or do anything. VS Code just automatically used its default formatting engine for me. Now, VS Code's default opinions of how you should format each language, they're not perfect, and really that's an opinionated personal preference type of thing anyways. However, there is a really cool extension called Prettier. We're not going to set it up in this video, but the idea is now you can use an extension that does have really, good opinions on how to format or indent on default, and then it will use that engine anytime you save your document or paste into it. Prettier is a bit controversial. Not everyone agrees with their stylistic opinions or way to structure code, but for JavaScript, I actually really like it. Cool, let's move on to the final tip or the final little feature for this video, and that has to do with ligatures in your fonts. So for example, let me go into my JavaScript file. So down here, I have an arrow function, right? And this arrow symbol, the equal greater than, certain fonts have built-in symbols specifically for these symbols in programming. So for example, there's a really popular font called JetBrains Mono. It's free and open source. If you want to download it, cool. It has all sorts of different shapes and symbols really optimized for programming. So here you can see I was referring to the arrow symbol in JavaScript, so on and so forth. So I have this font installed. So how do I use it in VS Code? You just go into your settings, your JSON file, set up a new line. Let's say font. If you start to search for font family, it's editor.fontFamily. I'll set it to JetBrains Mono. Give that a save. You can see the font changed. However, if I go back into that JavaScript file, we don't see the cool symbol for the arrow symbol. This is because you need to explicitly enable ligatures in VS Code. So in your settings file, comma, and you need to say, if you just search for ligatures, editor.fontLigatures, you need to enable it. It's false by default, so just turn it on, give that a save. Back in this file, cool. Now you can see you have that custom symbol for the arrow function. And that's actually going to bring this video to a close. We've only scratched the surface of, like 1 or 2% of what you can do with VS Code, but these were just my personal favorite tips and tricks that I've found throughout the years. Thank you so much for watching until the end of the video. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials.